Hi, this is Tessa Keogh, and this is another 20 with Tessa. The other day, I went through a video talking about 20 tips to get you started using Microsoft Excel with your one-name study. And today we're going to open an Excel workbook and play around with some of the tips that I gave you the other day. So let's get started. Now I thought what we would do first is use an Excel spreadsheet that some of you might be familiar with if you've watched a few of my other videos. And this is what I always refer to as the first worksheet in any of my workbooks dealing with my one-name studies, and that's my instruction sheet. And what I put in the instruction sheet is the date, the project, the tasks, the methodology, the status, and any additional notes, so that I basically know what the project is, know what's involved in doing the project, know how I plan to accomplish the project, the methodology so I can follow the steps each time, and the status so I know where I stopped working on it so I can go back to it and pick up right where I left off. And then additional notes is for any little quirks that I find or any websites that I might need to go to do additional work. So in any event, as you can see, this is the instruction sheet from my death register entries for England and Wales for my primary as well as variant surnames. And what I wanted to point out was that my quick access toolbar has been expanded, as I mentioned in the first tip, and I wanted to show you that you can get to your quick access toolbar by clicking on the Start button, going to Excel Options, and then going to Customize. And that's a rather simple process, and you can just go in and add or remove anything that you want in your quick access toolbar. The other way that you can approach it is to click right up here in this corner where it says Customize Quick Access Toolbar, and you would just go into More Commands, and it takes you right there as well. So the thing to keep in mind is that there's always a number of ways to do things in Excel, whether that's by using your mouse or using the keyboard keystrokes, or just realizing that there's a couple different ways of doing things. I'm going to show you one other which wasn't in a tip that I gave you the other day. If you have the Developer tab in your Excel program, you can click on the Developer tab and you can go into macros. You can record macros. At the point where you've recorded a macro, this will be available so that you can play your macros. And that's one way of working with macros. Everything you need to know about macros is in this Developer section. And that is also, if you don't have it currently on your tabs, on your ribbon, you can add that in the customization as well. So we'll take a real quick look. You go into the Start button, Excel Options, and you show the Developer tab in the ribbon. It's right in the Popular section. So if you didn't want to use the Developer tab, you can also go home, and let's take a look and see where we would find it. Here it is in Views. If you go here in View, the macro section opens up as well. You can view, record, just open up, find out anything you need to about your macros. I find it easier to work in the Developer tab so that all my information about macros is together, but whatever way you use it, just realize that there's more than one way to get places in Excel. Now, another one of the tips that I talked about was learning some shortcut keystrokes in Excel, and you can do this by going to the Help section, and that is just by clicking on F1 when you're in Excel, and rather quickly it loads the Help section, and you can do a search in Excel Help right up here in this search bar, or you can go online with the Bing search in this instance to look up information. Always make sure that you're asking for help in the Excel version that you use, because sometimes things change, whether you're using an earlier version of Excel, Excel 2007, which is what I'm using here, or the more current one, which is Excel 2010. But in any event, you can browse information. For instance, if you wanted to look at macros or workbook management, you can also come up here and do your particular search. So if we wanted Excel shortcuts, one of the first things that you get is an article about the shortcuts, and you can also get training. So take a look at the different choices it gives you, and you can find out anything that you need. For instance, this top one that I just mentioned gives you all of the shortcuts, shows you how to use them, and you can also print this item by clicking on Control P. Another tip I gave you was about using color in your worksheets so that you could easily find things if that's something that appeals to you. A lot of people are very visual, and I just picked colors. You could pick anything that works for you as well, but know that that section is right up here in the fill section. And so if you come up here and you were to add a color, as you can see as I scroll through here, it's changing the color that's in this first section. You could also apply standard colors, or if these colors don't appeal to you and they're in your theme, you can go to more colors. Standard colors are here, and custom colors can be anything you want them to be, either by scrolling around and finding it, or by going to the RGB or the HSL models. So you can really make your workbooks as useful visually as you need them to be. I'm just going to point out something here. In my birth workbook, the darkest green color I use is for free birth, marriage, death index, the national level. The mid green color is what I use for the local level, and the lightest green color is, and it depends on what I'm doing, but if it's family search, parish and civil records, or find my past, I make that reference with the lighter colors. If you wanted to add additional colors, you could clearly work through all of the versions of green. And this gives you a bit of an indication of how I use it. We've talked before about the labels or titles that are going to be in the first row, and we've also talked about the fact that these are frozen, so to speak, and that's done in View, Window, and Freeze Panes. And if you were to freeze the top row or unfreeze it, and I'll show you what that looks like, then when you scroll through, you have this frozen here so that on item 2 it's fine, but if you were to come up to item 4364, you'd want to know what these labels were as you work your way through items. So that's another tip to keep in mind. Now, when I pointed out that charts were pretty easy to work with, I showed you the data that I had entered. And in this instance, it's the surnames, it's the years of the U.S. Census, and I realize that not all years are in here, but I don't have any entries for my surname before 1810. And it's the total number, and that was done with simply a math function. If you were to look at this cell, you could see that it's equal sum parentheses. It takes the cell that's 02 through the cell 06, and it adds all that information together for me. If I were to add more surnames in here, that total would change the rows that it's adding up, but it would continue to add all of those rows because of how I set it up. So keep in mind that if you're using equal sum parentheses the cell colon the cell, it's going to add all of the numbers that are in that cell section, which would be all of these here. But for our purposes right now, what we're going to do is we're going to grab all of this information, and I've just scrolled over to contain it all, and then I'm going to click on F11. And when I do that, you see that it adds, this was my data information right here, it adds a chart as a separate worksheet page. So right now it brings up a chart that personally I don't find all that attractive or useful. So the first thing I could do here is go in and say I want to make it more colorful and just select a style. And as you can see, it changes the style but it doesn't include all the information I might like. So I can come over into Chart Layout and just select something. And in this instance, I'm going to select Layout 5. When I do that, as you can easily see, it took my data from my worksheet and it added it to the chart, and it assigned these colors. So if I were looking for the totals, that number is right here, and that's one thing you're going to need to keep in mind. You might not want to include the total in your chart if you're just comparing the surnames. I like having it in as long as I make a reference so that I know what I'm doing here. But it compares, it includes all of this information. So if we were to look here, we would see that this is the totals, and it gives you the value for this year of 1880. And it gives you this number here. So you can really play around. You can change the type of a chart that you have, and I don't know that this would necessarily be useful for my purposes because I came up with the kind of chart that I wanted, but we'll just grab one and see what it does. And by changing your chart, that's as quickly as you're able to play around with different charting information. And it's on a separate worksheet, so if you don't like it at the end, you can just click on this button and you can delete it. It'll ask you if you want to delete it, and you say yes, but it hasn't done anything with your information. So this is a really great way to visualize things, and I would encourage people to play around with that charting capability. Now, something else we talked about was to use the properties, and that's right up here. I've put it on my Excel workbook quick access toolbar, and if you bring up properties and click on it, you can put in the author name. Maybe the owner of this computer system is not the person who authored the workbook, so the name of the author can go in here, the title, the subject, keywords, as well as categories. You can come up with whatever kind of system that you want, whether that's draft, reviewed, preliminary draft, second draft, final, approved, whatever the status system is that you want to use for your workbooks. And then you can add comments here. And so I usually have an explanation about what my workbook entails that's in a shortened form. And the interesting thing is I can do a search on my computer for these keywords. I can do a search for the title if I wanted to, or the category. And the other interesting thing is if you're out of Excel and you're just going through your Explorer to try and find a file or to look through your files, take a look at the fact that if you hover over your file, this will bring up all of that information that you included in properties. So you can quickly look at the information and see anything you want without opening the file. Now, I title my files pretty clearly, but you could just number them or do anything else you want, knowing that all your information is in the properties section. So this is a nice ability to have that information in there for anything that you want to work with. Now, we talked in detail about both the instructions sheet and the key to color coding sheets, and I'm going to leave this alone after this, but I will tell you I think this is really important to have the instruction sheet, certainly for yourself, but also for anyone else who is going to be using these workbooks, because they'll be able to, if you share these in the cloud, they'll be able to see where someone, maybe a co-researcher, was working on the project, where they should pick up, how the group of you can work together. It's also really nice because I've found so many times I might start on a project and I might not get back to it for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and I'm really able to go back and see what my methodology was. And I wanted to let viewers know that I have gone ahead and copied off all of the instruction sheets that I have for the different workbooks that I've worked on, and that includes the Birth, Marriage, Death Index, the War Graves Commission, the VA Gravesite Locator, the SSDI, and the Irish censuses, I think, to this point. So all of those instruction worksheets are copied, and they're going to be available at the bulletin board for the Guild. And then if you needed to get a hold of me privately and get a copy of that workbook, because either you're not a member of the guild or you're not on the bulletin board, you can go ahead and leave me a note here at YouTube and I'll be happy to post that. We also talked a little bit about using hyperlinks where those are appropriate, and you're also going to find that on your home tab in the ribbon. It's in Styles, and as you can see, because I have hyperlinks in here, it's mentioned. But the thing that I wanted to point out here was that this is the 1901 Irish Census, and I went ahead and downloaded all of this information so I would have all of the various Keoghs that were in the 1901 census, and I would have all of their information. And this is done from the Irish Census site because it gives you their town, land, and street. It gives you their county, their age, their birth year, their birthplace, their occupation, their religion, their literacy. There's just a number of items that show up here. Their relation to the head of household, their marital status, just a wealth of information, can all be quickly and easily downloaded in both the 1901 and the 1911 census. And the purpose of having the hyperlinks here, even though it adds a little bit of lag time when you open your document, is that I could easily go just by clicking on the hyperlink, and it opens up National Archives.ie page, and it gives me the actual household here, which is Lizzie, and I believe that's the person that we opened the hyperlink for, and it also gives me the head of the family. So these two people are living together, and they both have the Keogh surname. If we ask all information, clicking on that box, it goes on and gives us all this information, and then we had downloaded it before, and that's a pretty easy to process to do on this website. But I could go through at this point, and if I were including information or trying to group a family, this is one of the ways that I could do it. I would have the actual residents of that particular house in that particular town and county all together. And so this is an easy way of going back and forth between a workbook and the website in those instances where it's helpful for you to do that. And that's why I've included in this instance on my play reel the family ID number, because I can group them as a family here. But this is an instance of showing you how you would want to include your link so that it's not something that you're worried about when you're looking over at these items here, and you can go directly to your link. Now, we also talked about having the dates and how important that was, and I just wanted to show you, if I were to click on this link and you look up here, you see that Excel has put it in automatically from a download as the 31st of March in 2021. And you're thinking to yourself, you know, that's not the right time frame. And it's because they don't necessarily look at information and put it in the same order. Excel is always working forward, and it does not view any date prior to 1900. And so this is the reason that I wanted to show you that whatever kind of dates you get here, you know, in this one it is correct. They did grab 1914 and 1917, and in this one they grabbed 1940. But in these previous ones, their date was wrong. So I made it a point of copying the information and making sure the date was completely written out in this workbook so that I wouldn't have any kind of mess up on the dates. And this workbook comes from the UK casualty records, and I know because I put it in my instructions that these records were from World War I and World War II. And so you know that the dates would have been anywhere from probably 1915 maybe, through the 1940s. I think probably your latest dates are going to be in 47. And so all of these dates you want to make sure comport before you separate your dates out. I also made sure that I had separate death years here, and that I did that because we were given age at death in this website. And so I could take 1947 and I could take the age at death, and if we click here, you'll see that what I ended up with was the birth year, and I did that by working with a formula. And you can always insert different types of formula, but this one here that I use pretty often is IMSUB, and basically what that's doing is returning the difference of two complex numbers, and it's going to be 19, in this instance it's going to be 1947, and it's going to be 21. And that will give you, if the person died in 1947 and they were 21 when they died, then they were born approximately, keep in mind it could be plus or minus a year depending on the month they're born, but they were probably born in 1926. And then you can look through and see if you can find people in any kind of census records, if those census records are available. Or you can take a look at your birth records that you have for the UK and hopefully find them in the birth records. And I just wanted to show you in another worksheet, and this was the SSDI. What I did was I used, I believe it's in data, and it's in text to columns. And what I did was I took a birth date which was combined, or a death date which was combined, and I separated them out. And you're able to do that, and I would say, you know, play around with text to columns, but what you do is you insert a few columns so that you can separate out the entirety of a birth date, so that you have the birth day and month, and you separate it out. I believe there was a comma here, so I did it with a comma to the birth year. And so when I have the birth date, birth year, death date, death year, you can always check on the date at death. And that's also done, as you can see here, that was done as a formula. So you don't have to do the math yourself. This is going to subtract the death year from the birth year, or G from E, and you end up with your death information. And so this is a really helpful thing to do, so that you just have as much information as possible, and you're able to work through a number of different pieces of information. You're also able, if you have information that's been separated out with the text to column, you can also put that information together. And what you would do is you would use a formula, and let's see if we can find it. It's concatenate. I'm not sure if that's pronounced right, but what that is telling you when you look at this function here is that it is joining several text strings into one. And so you would say okay, and it puts the information in for you. And I would say definitely take advantage of when Excel wants to work you through a function, because you can just say, I want to combine this and I want to combine this. And the other thing I'd probably say here is that I want there to be a space, and I don't know if that'll give me one right off the bat or if we have to play a little bit. Now it doesn't, and so I'll show you, I'll just delete this and show you the other one, which is equal sign, spelling out that word, and you get it right here. And then it tells you the text that you want to add, and what I would suggest here is you're going to take B2, comma, quote, space, quote, comma, C2, comma, quote, quote. And the first couple of times you do it, and then it also has the parentheses to close it. You look at this, and it actually is telling you, hopefully if we have this right, how this works. So let's see what it gives us. Okay, there we go. It gives us Frederick space Keogh. So there's always a number of different ways to do this, but I would say that if you go to the help section, it clearly explained how to do this, and it was just a process of knowing that you had your spaces and you had some quote marks. And this is another instance of Excel just needs to understand the formula, and then it'll do whatever you want. And the interesting thing here is once you've put the formula in, if we take our crossbar, and work it down, you see it did all the rest of the work for us without us having to enter in the formula again. Now, after you've done something like this and you're happy with this information, and I would include this for dates that you do or any kind of math functions, what you want to do, because right now each of these looks as it should at the formula bar, after you've done this, you want to go ahead and copy this. So it's just clicking on it there, and then you want to paste special, and you want to say that you want the values. Okay, and now we hit the escape bar to make the dancing square stop. And if you do that, you have the name entered. It's no longer the formula. So that is strictly the name, and that's not going to change. And I tend to do that when I have formulas after I've done the math or after I've switched out the names the way that I want them to be, so that there's not a formula that might get, if I switch something in that row or that column, that it kind of screws up everything. This just means when you've set yourself on the values that it took that formula, it gave you an answer, and that answer is now what's contained in your cell. So that's hopefully another useful tip for you. Now, I talked about separating dates out, and I thought I should probably show you how I do it, which is going to the Data tab and using text to columns. So if you were to take your information here and say that you wanted to work on text to columns, you would be able to take a look here and see your information, and it always shows up in the text wizard and it tells you how many steps, but it says this is a fixed width. Well, that's not what we're interested in. In this instance, we're interested in delimited, and so you can pick whatever item is going to delimit your information. And in our case, we're going to use the comma, because what that's going to do, and you can see it because it shows you, it gives you a data preview of what you're going to get. What it's done is it's separated everything out with what the comma was before. And you can use spaces, you can put your own item in, so if there's a colon or anything else, you can do that. But we do that, and then we say next. And then we say that we want it to be general, and we finish. And what it did here was it separated our information out. So you could have done something where you said you wanted it to be in these two columns and to keep it, but we just separated this out here, and I just wanted to show you. This is what it ends up looking like, when I put a label on each of these. So we have our date and we have our year. And what I've done then is just gone ahead and copied this again for purposes of what I want to show you, which is if I have a birth date and a birth year, I might have an event year, and this could be death. And what I'm going to do in this instance is I'm going to include a formula. So we go back to the formula section, we insert the formula, we're going to pick this subtraction, and it tells us, this is what we've asked for. And then I'm going to say I want the event year to go first, and I want the birth year to go second. And it gives me a response. So a person who was born in 1915 and the event year, let's say that it was their death, is in 1980, was approximately 65. By grabbing this crossbar again, I can go down here and I'm getting the information. And added. And what you'll notice is where I have left a space here just because I'm playing with it, it gives me a 0. You can either go through and delete those items individually, or you can find and replace, and anytime there's a 0, you can ask it to replace it. But you're going to need to be careful in this instance and not get the 0 from the 70. So on a find and replace, you're not going to want to say replace all. You're going to want to look at each one and approve it. It's actually pretty quick work if you're playing with it. But I wanted to show you that yet again we have our formula here, and what we need to do is the same item we did before, where we copied this row, we pasted it, and we asked for values. Finally, and I realize that we've kind of jumped all over the map with these tips, but hopefully this video is a video that you can kind of play around with, try the things I do, and or you could tell me if there's an easier way to do it, because as I mentioned, I'm kind of the beginner to slate intermediate in Excel. But in any event, this last item I had discussed just very generally. I had told you that you might want to work with the format and put it in your quick access toolbar. So what you want to do is you want to click on any item in here, and I'm just clicking on the reference number I give it, and then you want to click on your form toolbar, key. And what happens is this brings up all of your information that you have in a flat spreadsheet, and it brings it up in a form view, and you have 21 items that you can look through. You also can search with a particular criteria. Maybe you want to find everyone who was in the Australian infantry. Maybe your search criteria is 2 or 3 items, and so one of the things that you're going to want to pay attention to, you can also add new items. Once you've set up your workbook like this, you can work in the form view, and you can just click on new, and it'll basically give you what looks more like a relational database or an access type of form to enter your information. So if your preference is to do it that way, you can do this. You can also do advanced searches and use your criteria and add 2 or 3 things that you want to look at together to just find information or to drill through your worksheet, especially if your worksheet is very large. Obviously in this instance it's only 25 records, but when you have 6,000 records or 10,000 records, this is a really nice way of going through your worksheets. The one thing you're going to need to keep in mind, and probably what I do afterwards, since this is going to be my play reel, I would take out the potentially problematic date of death. I was playing around with these in order to show you different ones, but I wouldn't have this in here because, as you can see, this formula is one of those dates that comes in under the doesn't like anything before 1900 and tries to make up its own dates. But you get this information from that death date item, and so that's really useful to see it. So if I were playing with this as a form, I would make sure that item H, column H, was deleted from this worksheet, or at least hidden. So that's just something to show you how that works, and you can easily add it by just including form on your quick access toolbar. And the final item that we didn't talk about, but I'm going to include in this just to play around a little bit, is if we were to go to the Developer tab, which we talked about, I just want to show you that even though I don't know very much about macros, you could set up some easy macros. And actually what we're going to click on is Record Macros. And so we would just do that, and you can name your macro. You just can't have a space. So we're going to just call this My Macro. And you can store it in a personal macro workbook, or you can store it in a new workbook or this workbook. So for this purpose, we're just going to say that we're going to keep it in this workbook. And this is just, I'm going to say that I'm adding my name and title. So that's just going to be what we call it, and then at the point where we say OK, you'll notice that this blue bar comes up, which tells you that a macro is currently recording, and you need to click on it to stop it recording. So in this first cell, I'm just going to include my name. And in the second cell, I'm going to type in Guild of One Name Studies. And in the third one, I'm going to include instructions. And this is just to give you something to play with. Maybe what you're doing in a macro is all of the labels on your instruction worksheet. It can be a macro for anything. So just keep that in mind. And at the point where we're finished with that, we just click to stop the recording. So we've done that, and it's a macro. So if I go to a new sheet in this workbook. And I click on View Macros. I have macro 2 in here. I can ask the macro to run. Now you might have any number of macros in here, from anything simple to something very complex. And if I ask it to run, and I'm in sheet 2, which is blank, it adds all that information. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, big deal, so it added 3 rows of information. And this was just to give you kind of a taste of how simple it is to work with the macro, because I could be adding, like I said before, all of my instructions information and just leaving myself blanks to make changes in each individual one, or making sure that I always include an instruction sheet and always include a color coding sheet. And there's just any number of macros you can set up to do. You can set up macros for a particular, walking you through 3 or 4 steps to work on a formula, or for working with, something as simple as always including information you want on every worksheet. But I would go ahead and just try playing with the macros on something as simple as this, because you can also just go ahead and delete those sheets that you did. And that's perfectly easy to do. As I mentioned before, if you do not add the developer tab to your quick, in customizing, you can also, I guess we have to work through it all so that I know which one I'm working in. It's in View. And the macros are listed there, and you could work with your macros. You could view them, you could record them. So if we were to open it up from macros here, you'd go right to the same place. The final thing you can do, if you get really fancy, is you can add your macros to the toolbar. And the way that you would do that is you would go into More Commands, and you would just ask it to add that particular macro you had, and you can customize even each of your individual macros if you want to. So I'm sure that there are a number of people who use very complex macros that are in the Guild of One Name Studies, because I've watched some of the Excel classes that have been done in seminars, and I am sure that they could walk us through some macros. And in fact, I might ask a few of them to hang out with me in a Google Plus Hangout, and we'll record it and we'll work through some Excel macros. So if you have any ideas on macros you think would be helpful for your Guild and or genealogy studies, let me know and we'll make a list of them and include them in another video. As I mentioned, if you have any tips for using Excel with your genealogy or a one-name study, please share them with the rest of us, and what we'll do is try to put together another video that shows the various tips to all of us so that we can all learn from it. Now, if you have particular tips and or you have questions, you weren't able to follow along with something I did, or you had some questions about it, feel free to leave me a comment here at YouTube. You can also email me. You could post publicly or privately on Google+. You can visit the Guild on Facebook or at Google+, because I know that there are a number of members of the Guild who could probably answer questions about Excel. And the really great thing is now we have a bulletin board through the Guild, and so if you have questions, you can go directly to the bulletin board and to the topic entitled Excel and ask that question or share that tip. So thanks for watching. I realize this went a little long again. Sorry about that, but I hope it helps you, and all the best with your studies.